I don't think. I think you have to drive Russia to the table, and the Russian. So Russia has two motives. One is to defang Ukraine and to either get rid of it as a state, or make it neutral and a non-factor. But it has also achieved some significant aims. It's occupied 20% of the territory. It has, cost a lot of infrastructure. It has driven. It's changed the demography of Ukraine for the long term, because the expectations are that the population of Ukraine, even after the war, will probably be in the range of 32 million people, far less than the 37 to 40 million before the war, many of the refugees as time goes on. So it's created a smaller, if more well-armed and effective military arrival. It has, and I think Russia will have to look at the long-term consequences of growth of the Russian economy and the consequences for Russia as a long-term significant power. Because if Russian growth, which is slowing dramatically now, Russian reserves have dried up, Russian inflation is out of control, the domestic economy, industrial production, purchases of goods are in stagnation, if not recession. All of this affects Russian long-term GDP. And the slower Russian GDP growth, the more it falls behind the United States, the more it becomes dependent on China and falls behind China. Russia is not participating in any significant way in the AI revolution. Russia is, and I think Russia's elite will face the same problem that the Soviet elite faced when it overextended, when it saw Russian Soviet growth slowing and the gap between them and the rest of the world, and particularly their adversaries, growing. And I think as Russia sees this, there may be more pressure on Mr. Putin to declare victory and move on. But I don't think that will happen until he sees that the West is committed, at least for the foreseeable future, for the next 5 or 6 years, to support Ukraine in its territorial defense and in its prosecution of the war, and that can be handled with the additional 200 to 250 billion in Russian hard currency reserves held in Western banks. That would represent roughly the annual commitment that the United States had previously been making, and would allow Europe to continue to meet all of the needs of Ukraine at the level that had been done before Trump shut off financing for the Ukrainian economy and for the Ukrainian military. The fact that the U.S. is willing to sell these weapons through Europe to Ukraine, and that Mr. Trump seems to be less fearful of the nuclear blackmail on the Russian side. We saw that in his reactions to Mr. Medvedev's ill thought out comments, and more recently in his desire to test nuclear weapons. I think that creates the circumstances which could bring Mr. Putin to the table.
Yeah, and actually, as far as American pressure is concerned, we know that Trump is going to sign a bill on sanctions against countries that trade with Russia. It would be the second part of so-called hell sanctions from Trump. To what consequences can it lead? Would it hit Russia painfully and Putin starts thinking about ceasefire or something else in context of the war?
As I say, I think there is a triad of issues. Number one, the capacity of Ukraine to attack Russian infrastructure in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and major cities in the heartland of Russia, not just within several hundred miles of the Ukrainian border, 300, 400, 500, 700 miles and further, which will require some Western weapons and obviously some technological movement in the Ukrainian arms production sector. The second is to see that the West has the resources. I think he's counting on the idea that if Putin is counting on the idea that Europe is spending will be spending too much money, and there are political movements that are emerging. All the political leaders, the British political leader is unpopular. The French political president is not going to be running again, and his political movement is not popular. So in those cases, I think that he sees, and Merz as a coalition will be around for a few years, but again, it is losing popularity. So I think he feels that if Europe has a bigger burden to finance Ukraine's war effort, that this will lead to positive political developments for Russia, that anti-spending populists will come to power. But if Europe uses creatively uses these 200 billion in hard currency reserves that it has, it will not face those questions for 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years, and that is a signal to Putin to come to the bargaining table. And finally, the effect of sanctions and the effect of Ukraine hitting the Russian infrastructure and the Russian economy with more direct attacks, especially on the military production and on the energy sector, which feeds the military production. I think that would be the triad of factors that would bring him to the table. And the fact that Trump is ready to support a couple of them and Europe is discussing supporting the other, I think is a positive sign that these three can come into place. And I think soon after all of these measures are implemented, Putin will be more inclined to go to the table, especially as the Russian elite recognizes that Russia's growth path and Russia's internal economic problems are on the rise.
I have one more question in terms of sanction, in terms of this the second step. Actually, we have discussed large-scale corruption scandal in Ukraine, but I would like you expand your thought. How Trump can use this corruption scandal in Ukraine, in Ukrainian energy, in a negotiation process? I mean, will it influence this negotiation process?
It could influence these, and that's why this is a signal to the president that he has to take steps to strengthen international confidence and domestic confidence in his government. That means he has to clean house in the presidential administration. He has to create a government, I would say a technocratic government of experts and people who enjoy the confidence, some people from within the current government, some people from outside, to show that this is a broad tent, and to surrender his control of domestic economic policy to the parliament and to the new government, which he has not done. He's run a very centralized, semi-authoritarian, narrowly controlled, tightly controlled system, and he has to keep control of diplomacy and military and security affairs and make them absolutely part of his mandate, but leave the rest to a competent government. And in other words, create a broader coalition, not necessarily a political coalition, but a coalition that is acceptable to the broader opposition. We see that his polling numbers have been low. He was losing to General Zelenskyy in a future runoff 63 to 37. There are some reports that he's lost 40% of his base support as a result of the scandal, based on as yet unpublished, but reports of polls that are in the works of being completed. That means he's at maybe 25% support. Indeed, there was a poll recently that showed that only 25% of Ukrainians want him to stand for a second term. So that means he's a lame duck, and he has to compensate. A lame duck, he has to bring other ducklings into the pond, and they should all be swimming with him in a coordinated way. The good news about Ukraine is that even the most radical people in Ukraine, intelligent, radical, hardline people who are upset about Zelenskyy's government's recent performance. And by the way, there's no evidence that Zelenskyy directly participated in any corruption schemes. There is the evidence that he just had very bad judgment in the types of allies and friends he entrusted with key government positions. I think that if Zelenskyy takes these kinds of positive and concrete steps, it will strengthen his bargaining position. It will shore up morale in the country, and I think it will put Ukraine on the right track. I do think that European leaders are behaving calmly on these issues. The President Trump has not yet sought to make this an issue. But yes, this hurts. This does hurt Ukraine's interest. This does make the president weaker, which is one more reason why he has to share power and bring more people into the tent and maintain national unity. I don't think there will be mass protests to drive him out of power. I don't think there'll be pressure to hold early elections. But I think that the best way he can handle this and make Ukraine strengthen Ukraine's hand in negotiations is by creating a government of national trust with very competent people of impeccable reputation. And Ukraine has some of them. They are well known to the international community. And I think it's the ball is in his court. And I believe, I pray that he will go down this path.